This is a map of the world. When you look closely, you will see the 7 continents, including Asia, Australia, North and South America, Africa, Europe, and Antarctica. However, this wasn't always the case. About 300 million years ago, Earth didn't have 7 continents. Instead, it had Pangaea, a sizable supercontinent which was encircled by Panthalassa, a single ocean. Up until about 200 million years ago, during the Triassic Period, Pangaea was the only continent on Earth. Then it started to fragment. Pangaea was divided into 2 new continents, Laurasia and Gondwanaland, during the Triassic Period. The smaller continent, Laurasia, migrated north and eventually broke off into what is today known as Europe, Asia, and North America. The bigger one, Gondwanaland, divided into the modern continents of South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, the Indian Subcontinent, and the Arabian Peninsula, which together make up nearly 2/3 of the modern continent. Many people are unaware that Gondwanaland also divided into another portion, a portion that took researchers 375 years to find, becoming the world's 8th continent, which had been lying in wait for them under the ocean this entire time. How did this continent come to be? What formerly dwelt there? Furthermore, how long has it been submerged? Join us as we explore scientists' insane new discovery of a hidden continent under the ocean. Abel Tasman was on a mission in 1642. The seasoned Dutch sailor was certain that the southern hemisphere had a massive continent, and he was determined to find it. Europeans had an unwavering belief that there must be a sizable landmass there, which they preemptively named Terra Australis, to balance out their own continent in the north. At the time, this region of the world was still largely mysterious to them. The fixation had existed since the time of the ancient Romans, but it would only now be put to the test. Tasman therefore departed from the Indonesian port of Jakarta on August 14th in 2 tiny ships and sailed west, south, then east, until arriving at the South Island of New Zealand. It was not a good start for him when he first met the Maori inhabitants, who were believed to have arrived in the area hundreds of years earlier. On day 2, some of them set out in a canoe and rammed a small boat that was carrying messages between the Dutch ships. Dead were 4 Europeans. The fate of the Europeans' targets is unknown after they fired a cannon at 11 additional canoes. And that was the end of his expedition. Tasman gave the tragic spot the ironic name Murderer's Bay and sailed home a few weeks later without having even set foot on this new continent. Although he thought he had found the big southern continent, it was obviously not the commercial nirvana he had envisioned. He never came back. Australia had already been discovered by this point, but the Europeans believed it was not the legendary continent they were looking for. When they changed their minds, it was later given the name Terra Australis. Tasman had no idea that he had been correct all along. There was a continent missing. When a team of geologists revealed the discovery of Zealandia, they made headlines. It is roughly 6 times the size of Madagascar and spans 1.89 million square miles, 4.9 million square kilometers. The team boldly declared that there are more than 7 continents, despite the fact that encyclopedias, maps, and search engines had long maintained that there are only 7. But as we can see now, there are actually 8 of them, and the newest one is the smallest, thinnest, and youngest in the entire world, shattering all previous records. Only a small number of islands, including New Zealand, protrude from the ocean's depths, making up 94% of it. All along, it had been hiding in plain sight. But that was only the start. The continent is still mysterious 5 years later, its secrets zealously guarded beneath 6,560 feet, 2 kilometers of water. One of the largest marine domains in the world was unleashed when the continent was ultimately revealed to the globe. In addition to New Zealand, the continent includes Lord Howe Island and Ball's Pyramid, 2 minor Australian territories, as well as the island of New Caledonia, a French colony noted for its stunning lagoons. One 18th century explorer claimed that the latter appeared not to be larger than a canoe. Zealandia was formerly a part of Gondwana, a supercontinent that once covered the entirety of the southern hemisphere and was formed around 550 million years ago. It was located in a corner on the eastern side, bordering a number of other countries, including the entirety of eastern Australia and half of West Antarctica. Then, some 105 million years ago, Zealandia began to be dragged apart, according to experts, due to a process that we still don't fully understand. In comparison to oceanic crust, which is typically around 10 kilometers thick, continental crust is often about 40 kilometers deep. The tension caused Zealandia to become so stretched that its crust is currently barely 20 kilometers, 12.4 miles deep. The wafer-thin continent eventually submerged under the water, though not quite to the level of regular oceanic crust. Geologists recognize Zealandia as a continent despite it being thin and submerged due to the kind of rocks that may be found there. Granite, schist, and limestone are common examples of igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks found in the continental crust, whereas basalt is more frequently found on the ocean floor. But there are still a lot of uncertainties. The eighth continent is especially fascinating to geologists and somewhat perplexing due to its peculiar beginnings. For instance, it's still unclear how Zealandia, which is extremely thin, managed to maintain its integrity and avoid breaking up into many small microcontinents. Another unsolved question is when exactly Zealandia became submerged and whether dry land ever existed there. The ridges that are currently above sea level were created when the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates collided. What lived there becomes a question as a result of this. Gondwana itself was home to a diverse range of flora and fauna, including the first four-limbed land animals and later an abundance of the largest creatures to ever live, the titanosaurs. It also had a mild climate and a 39 million square mile, 101 million square kilometer range. Therefore, could their preserved remains be scattered across the rocks of Zealandia? The remains of several fossilized land animals were discovered in New Zealand in the 1990s, including the rib bone of a giant long-tailed, long-necked dinosaur, a sauropod, a beaky herbivorous dinosaur, a hypsilophodont, and an armed dinosaur, an ankylosaur. Fossilized land animals are uncommon in the southern hemisphere. Then, in 2006, some 500 miles, 800 kilometers east of the South Island, the foot bone of a big predator, presumably a type of allosaur, was found. Importantly, all of the fossils were created after Zealandia separated from Gondwana. These islands may have served as sanctuaries while the rest of Zealandia was drowned, as it is now. Thus, this does not necessarily imply that there were dinosaurs wandering across most of Zealandia. Rupert Sutherland, a professor of geophysics and tectonics at the Victoria University of Wellington, says there is a lengthy argument about whether it is feasible to have land animals without continuous land and whether they would have perished without it. The kiwi, a clumsy, flightless bird with whiskers and feathers that resemble hair, was one of New Zealand's strangest and most adored residents, adding complexity to the plot. Oddly, its closest relative isn't thought to be the moa, which belonged to the same group as ratites and lived on the same island until it went extinct 500 years ago. Instead, scientists believe that its closest relative is the even larger elephant bird, which stalked Madagascar's forests up until 800 years ago. Scientists now think that both birds descended from a single ancestor who lived on Gondwana as a result of the discovery. It took 130 million years for it to completely disintegrate, but once it did, it left behind pieces that went on to become South America, Africa, Madagascar, Antarctica, Australia, the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian Subcontinent, and Zealandia. It follows that at least some of the now submerged Zealandia may have stayed above sea level throughout, except that the entire continent, and perhaps even all of New Zealand, is believed to have been submerged some 25 million years ago. It was assumed that all of the animals and plants colonized afterward. So what took place? Although it is impossible to directly gather fossils from Zealandia's seafloor, researchers have started drilling into its depths. The fossils that occur in extremely shallow seas are the most useful and distinctive. There are zillions and zillions of small, tiny little fossils that are distinctly different, which is why they leave a record. The shape of Zealandia is another unsolved puzzle. There are two features on a geological map of New Zealand that particularly stand out. A plate boundary that runs along the South Island and is so significant that it can be seen from space is one of them, and it's called the Alpine Fault. The second is that New Zealand's geology is strangely bent, as is the geology of the entire continent. The Pacific and Australian tectonic plates collide, dividing both along a horizontal line. The previously continuous ribbons of granite no longer line up and are now practically at right angles, as if someone had grabbed the lower half and twisted it away at this precise location. That the tectonic plates shifted and in some way bent them out of shape is an obvious explanation, but the precise details of how and when this occurred remain a complete mystery. There are many ways to interpret this, yet there is still a lot that is unknown. The continent is unlikely to reveal all of its secrets anytime soon, according to Sutherland. When everything is 2 kilometers (1.2 miles) underwater, and the layers you need to sample are 500 meters (1,640 feet) below the seabed as well, he says it's rather challenging to make findings. Exploring a continent like that is quite difficult. Therefore, sending ships out to survey areas simply requires a lot of time, money, and effort. Even if nothing else, the existence of the 8th continent in the world proves that nearly 400 years after Tasman's exploration, there is still much to learn. Let us know your thoughts about this discovery in the comments section below.